This is Gene Montrostelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 488, originally aired November 18th, 2020. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Every week on the podcast, we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping and EFT so you can move past the basic recipe to master the art of delivery. You'll be able to find root causes faster, clear issues quicker, and have longer lasting results with your tapping. Today, we are going to talk about how to approach and how to uncover and how to clear limiting beliefs. Before we do that, two quick announcements. First of all, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to eliminate self-sabotage. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button, and you'll get a chance to receive that guide absolutely free. Every single day over the next 10 days, we'll send you a little resource that'll take 5 minutes for you to consume, an audio, a video, a little instruction. Then you can try it out, and so you can have a more effective, productive day. The other announcement is I want to send a huge thank you to all of the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. For those of you who are supporters, I hope you have been enjoying those bonus MP3s that have been showing up every single day in your inbox in the month of November. If you would like to support the podcast, receive some amazing gifts for supporting the show and bonuses that just show up from time to time, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. That's tappingqa.com/support. And once again, a big thank you to all of those who make the show possible. Limiting beliefs is something that can be difficult to tap for because there's sometimes not an obvious entry in an emotional way into something, that it feels almost like it is a statement of fact. I am not capable of doing this thing. It is possible for others to have this, but it's not possible for me. I failed in the past, I'm going to fail again. And those are statements. And we know that when we are tapping, it is important that we are able to get into the viscera, the emotion, the somatic sense of dealing with the issue, because tapping is a somatic tool that does a really good job of down-regulating the emotion. As it's down-regulating the emotion, we get the opportunity to change the beliefs that exist. And so when I am tapping with one of my clients on a limiting belief, there's kind of three ways that I like to approach it. And typically I approach it in the order that I'm going to present this today, but it's not necessarily a recipe where it's this is number one, this is number two, this is number three, but this is kind of in order of most common to find relief to being able to deal with the more subtle nuances, ways that come up from time to time. So the first thing that we do when we are tapping on a limiting belief as we tune into that particular limiting belief is we just start to provide all of the counter information that we know intellectually about that limiting belief. So, for example, the limiting belief is, I always fail when I try. Now, that is a belief, but as you hear that, you know that that is not true because we have succeeded at lots and lots of things. And so as we are looking at the information of the belief, we start bringing the opposite information to it. I am in a circumstance where it's not an all or nothing proposition, that I don't always succeed and I don't always fail. Sometimes I do something and I get part of the way there, and that is better than nothing. And so we just start bringing the obvious counter information to it. And if you're tapping on your own, sometimes that can feel like a daunting task because you're caught inside of the belief itself. And so what I like to do when I'm tapping on my own is I imagine a friend of mine is coming to me and they're saying, it's impossible for me to get this job. Well, after I hear that, then what I would do is I just, as a good friend, I start providing advice to them. How do you know it is impossible? You have lots of experience. You might be more qualified than you think. You don't know until you try. Like, whatever advice you'd be giving as a good friend is the advice that we can give to ourselves, is the advice that we can give to those internal stories and struggles that we're being stuck inside of this particular thing. The second thing that we like to do is I like to see if what is the proof for the limiting belief. And oftentimes there's some sort of initial sensitizing event where in the past I did something that did not work out very well. Recently, I was working with a client who was in a circumstance where it felt as if she felt as if she put herself out there, she was going to be rejected. That this idea of anything I share with the world is not good enough. That's a really clear limiting belief. I can't share stuff and be heard. And so as we were poking around and we were doing work, the place that we landed was when she was 5 years old, a younger sibling was brought home. And because the younger sibling was brought home, all of the attention went to the younger sibling. And so there was this story that she learned when she was 5, because 5 doesn't process the world very, very well, that I am not as important as this other person in our family, when that other person just needed attention. And personally, I can relate to this. I don't remember this, but it's a story that my family tells, because I'm 2 years older than my brother. When my brother came home, he had brown eyes, and I had blue eyes. And everybody in my family was making this big deal about these beautiful brown eyes. So as a 2-year-old, what I started saying is, I have brown eyes too. Because that very young part of us wants to be connected and wants to believe that we belong. And so when there is an initial sensitizing event, it is giving us proof to what is going on. And with the example with my client, where we're dealing with her at 5, she knows that her parents love her. She knows that they were supporting her in her life, but her 5-year-old self perceived that very, very wrong. And now, as an adult, that is showing up whenever she's showing up in the world. I'm not good enough to be noticed. I'm not good enough to be heard. And so if we can find our way to an initial sensitizing event, it makes it easier for us to do that. For me, the way I oftentimes like to do that is I imagine myself, or I imagine have my client imagine themselves doing the thing that they have the limiting belief about. Getting that physical sensation, the tightness in the chest, the butterflies in the stomach, the wall in front of them, however they feel when they're trying to do that thing that they have the limiting belief about, and then asking, well, what proof do you have that this is the case? In this particular circumstance, when I was working with this client, as she was feeling a sense of not being worthy, I asked the question, how old do you feel when you feel not good enough to share? And that's when she said 5 or 6. So then we started doing some parts work and having a conversation with her 5-year-old self. And that's where we discovered the story of her feeling that she was not important enough to her family just because the family was taking care of an infant that needed that sort of care. And so by trying to find the place of the proof, we were able to deconstruct the proof, which gives us the ability to not carry that belief into the moment. The third question, or the third thing that I like to approach when we're looking at limiting beliefs, is to see if we were given that limited belief by someone else. The question I like to ask a lot is, who else in your family believes this? And what happens is, oftentimes we are given beliefs by a parent, by our family structure, by our culture, by our religious affiliation, that says this is the way that the world is. And when we pick up a belief from a place where we have a strong connection, on a subconscious level, there's a part of us that feels that if I let go of this belief, then I am saying my parents are wrong. I'm saying my family is going to reject me. I'm saying I'm no longer a part of this, because we equate, or we make the sharing the exact same beliefs as a prerequisite as to belonging to that relationship, or belonging to that family, or that culture, or whatever that community is that we are attached to. And as you think about it, I'm sure there are lots and lots of relationships that you have in your life with people you're really close with that you do not share the same belief about everything, and you can still maintain that relationship. So intellectually, we can see the flaw and the fallacy inside of this. But if we're in a circumstance where we are worried that we are going to lose our sense of connection in a relationship, then it's going to be really difficult for us to let go of that belief. And so when I am in a circumstance like that, what I'm doing is I am not saying that they are wrong. I'm not saying that I am disconnecting from this relationship. I'm simply saying that belief is no longer useful for me. And when I'm doing something like that, where we're doing this exercise of letting go of belief that helps us to be inside of a relationship or inside of a community, the vocabulary I like to use when we're doing that sort of tapping is, I am putting this belief down because it is not useful for me in this moment. I'm not saying the other people are wrong. I'm not saying that they were wrong for giving me the belief. I'm not saying that our relationship is over. I'm simply saying that this belief is no longer useful for me. And at some point in the future, if I want to pick it up, I'm allowed to do that. I can think of no time in my own life, and I can think of no time, or at least no time that my clients have reported back to me, where they have put a limiting belief down and then picked that limiting belief back up. But the reason why we're using that particular vocabulary is there is a part of us on a subconscious level that wants us to be safe by being in that relationship or being in that community. And so by phrasing it in the way of, I'm putting this belief down because it no longer serves me, and if I want to pick it up in the future, I can, it makes it easier for that part of my system that is trying to keep me safe by keeping me in the relationship or keeping me in the community. It's going, okay, this is just a trial. And if I need to pick it back up, I can pick it back up again, which makes it easier for us to let it go. It's kind of like when we're trying to take a toy away from a child because we want them to eat dinner. We're not saying I'm taking this away from you, but it's, I'm going to take your stuffed animal and I'm just going to put it here on top of the fridge. And when we're done eating, you can get it again. But you can see it right there. It's not going anywhere. I'm not taking it away from you. I'm just removing it so we can have dinner. Now, that doesn't always work with a child, but it works really, really well with our subconscious mind because it gives us the ability to release it and let it go. The three basic approaches for me when dealing with a limiting belief is first, when they state a belief, to bring the information that we know is contrary to that. The second is we go seek out an initial sensitizing event. And I didn't mention this earlier, sometimes that initial sensitizing event can be something that we witnessed. You know, one of my favorite examples is a client telling me the story of their fear of bees. They never had a bad experience with a bee, but when they were really young on the floor in the kitchen, as their mother was cooking, a bee flew in and she freaked out while she was cooking, trying to shoo this bee out, which taught my client as a child that bees were dangerous because one of the most important people in their life was afraid of it. So the initial sensitizing event wasn't them experiencing the bee, but seeing someone else experience it. The third thing is to see if someone else shares that belief or if we got it from a group culturally, to let it go. Now, one final thing to consider and to think about is sometimes when my client comes and presents a limiting belief to me and they say, I have this limiting belief, which is different than I want to take this action, we're finding proof, and a limiting belief pops up in the flow of a session. But when they've actually shown up and said, this is the limiting belief, like all work with my clients, I treat myself and I treat my clients as inaccurate eyewitnesses to what is going on. I'm not saying they're wrong, but we're going to start to investigate that limiting belief in a way to see if that's actually it. Because sometimes we will present a limiting belief or we will state a limiting belief that is the culturally appropriate limiting belief, which is actually masking the real limiting belief. And as an example, you might have someone say, well, the men in my family are unlucky in love, therefore I'm unlucky in love. Which could be a true statement. It could be a story that the family talks about and how you have all of these men in the family who are much older and aren't in relationships, and it just becomes a story that we tell. When in actuality, the circumstance could be, I'm afraid of being rejected, and therefore I don't want to put myself out there because I don't think I'm good enough to have a long-term lasting relationship with someone who loves me. And that is a significantly less, and I'll put this in quotes, safer, it's a less safer belief to state out loud. If I say, it's my culture, it's my family, this is the way that I am, then that's something that feels like it is outside of me, and it's okay for me to admit that because it's not my fault. But if I'm in a circumstance where I'm saying, I don't believe I'm good enough, that's a harder thing to come to terms with. It might be a harder thing for me to believe about myself, or it's a harder thing for me to admit to a practitioner who I'm going to get help with because I'd like to be in a situation where I have a lasting relationship. And so when a client presents to me, this is what my limiting belief is, I use that as an entry point into doing our work, but I just take the limiting belief and I set it aside as we start to investigate what's going on to see what comes up in the flow of conversation in the client session. And then after 10 or 15 minutes, come back to the initial limiting belief to see if we've uncovered something else, the sense of not feeling worthy of relationship, or if it truly is the limiting belief that they have presented, which then gives us the opportunity to then approach that. And in some circumstances, a client might show up with a single limiting belief, state it very, very clearly, and what that is it's the tip of the iceberg for multiple limiting beliefs. And as we unpack and clear the first one, we find a second, we find a third, we find a fourth, and again, we just go back through this process again. In a very straightforward way, we give the information that is counter to the limiting belief that they are stating. We see if there is proof in our own experience or experience that we've witnessed. We see if someone else has given us the belief. And if the belief is presented as fact, we investigate whether or not it is actually fact. So that's a pretty straightforward approach to limiting beliefs. Again, I don't use that as a recipe necessarily, but if it's something that you're getting more used to doing, jot these 3 things down so that when you're working with limiting beliefs, you have an order to kind of work your way through. If you have any questions or any comments about this little approach, I'd love to hear from you. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. If you know someone in your life who would enjoy this conversation about limiting beliefs and how we can unpack them and move through them in a more efficient way, please pass it along. The most common way people find a new piece of content is from the invitation of a friend, and you're going to reach people that I would never reach, and it might just make a difference in their day today. And the reality is, if you send someone in your life a text message or an email that says, hey, I was thinking of you today, you might really like this resource, even if they never click the link, the simple fact that you have reached out to say that you are thinking of them will make a difference in their day, that they'll feel loved, that they'll feel a little more connected. And in 2020, feeling a little more connected and a little more loved is something that we all could use a little bit more of. If you have not done so yet, I would really encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. In podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. You can get the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, Audible, really anywhere you get audio. Just search Tapping Q&A and you will find the show. Click subscribe, click follow, click whatever button they have so that when a new episode comes out, you get a notification so you don't miss the tapping goodness. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have something you'd like us to cover in the future, some of the best episodes I've ever done have come from recommendations from listeners just like you. This year for our 30-day tapping challenge in the month of November, every single video that I created was from a recommendation from a listener just like you. Please, please, please reach out. I want to make sure that the podcast is as useful as possible. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com, or you can just go up to the menu bar on the website, click on that contact link. If you have the Tapping Q&A app, click contact. You can send me an email. You can even send me a voice memo from right inside of the app. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli and Tapping Q&A.